In this video I'll be talking about a very special film, or films I should say, which I just watched over this weekend, and I really want to talk about them and kind of review them for you, talk about them in depth a little bit, but also give you some background information on what these films actually are, because as far as I can tell there is no real guide to these films, and these films are the three films that make up the Disappearance of Eleanor Rigby. Story, project, concept, film, mission, quest, thing. Basically, director Ned Benson, writer-director Ned Benson, had this idea for a film. He wrote it, and he was with Jessica Chastain, the actress at the time, and she read it and liked it and wanted to see more of the perspective of this enigmatic character that was Eleanor Rigby. And so he wrote scenes for her character, and it became this two-part project. The Disappearance of Eleanor Rigby, him, and the Disappearance of Eleanor Rigby, her. Two separate films that kind of form the same kind of concept film, I guess you could say. The Disappearance of Eleanor Rigby, him, is about 90 minutes long, an hour and a half, and The Disappearance of Eleanor Rigby, her, is about an hour and 45 minutes long. Put together, taking away credits, you've got about 3 hours and 10 minutes of a big chunk of film, basically. And there's also The Disappearance of Eleanor Rigby, Them, which is an amalgam of both the him and her films, a 2-hour long cut of both perspectives mixed together. And this was kind of made as a sort of a commercial version to put out in the cinemas. Now, him and her premiered, I believe, at the Toronto Film Festival in I'm not sure if it was October or November. It was in late 2013. And then in 2014, the Them cut was released theatrically, and then him and her were also released theatrically. So you have what people are calling the Eleanor Rigby trilogy, but I want to clarify, this isn't a trilogy. This is far from a trilogy. This is a two-film project with a commercial version. I watched him and her, I fell in love with them, and so I decided I was going to watch them as well, and I'll get to my thoughts on them at the end of the video. But for now, the film itself, the story itself, is about a married couple played by James McAvoy, who plays Connor, and Jessica Chastain, who plays Eleanor Rigby. And in case you're wondering, yes, it is a reference to the Beatles song. It is kind of mentioned in the film, but the song isn't used in the film, thankfully, because I think that would have been a bit too cheesy and on the nose. But it's a cool title. I like the title, and I don't think there's really a set order in which you should watch him and her. But because kind of the colloquial kind of, I guess, way of saying, you know, her and him or him and her is him and her, his and hers, you know, it's just, it always goes him and her, basically. So that you kind of in your mind think, okay, I'll watch him, then her, and I have to say that is, for me, the order you should watch these films in. I think it would still work if you did her and him, but it's a lot more interesting if you do him than her. But I've looked it up and I haven't seen any, you know, the director hasn't said anywhere that I can find which order you should watch them in, and I haven't found out how it was screened at the film festival, so I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it's him then her. Either way, I think it would work, but that's the order I would go with. So I watched him first. I'm getting off track here. This gets quite complicated. It's a very unique release for a film, a very unique idea for a film, and James McAvoy plays Connor. And you know, the film opens and we see the couple together in a happier moment, and then it cuts to them in a more turbulent part of their relationship as a married couple, and Eleanor decides that she's going away and she feels like she needs to get away from everything. Now there is something that's happened in all of the characters' lives that is very pivotal to why she disappears, although don't be mistaken this for a Gone Girl type of situation. It's not like that at all. It's a lot more realistic than Gone Girl in a way, but something's happened. I'm not going to spoil what it is because I didn't know before I watched the films. And what I loved about this incident is that it's not kind of like thrown at you. It's not like a character's like, well, this, you know, it's kind of just dropped in there in everyday conversation about half an hour into the film, and you kind of, it starts to click in your head what happened. And I love that because these films, and I'm exclusively talking about him and her, not them, these two films, they don't spoon feed you anything, you know. It feels very authentic, very realistic. You get a sense of who all the characters are, and not necessarily their motivation. Sometimes that's kind of the, not the fun, because it's quite a dreary film at times. It can be very down and depressing, but the interesting thing about this film is trying to figure out what is going on behind the eyes of some of these characters. But you kind of know a lot of the other characters, you know, why they're there, and well, for me anyway, when I look at it from a filmmaking point of view, like, you know, what parts they play in the story. But what I loved was the realism and the moments where it could have gone into the cliche territory, where, you know, when you watch a drama film and there's these two characters and you know that there's like unfinished business between them, or things left unsaid, and in a cliche moment they'll say, oh, I just want to tell you I love you, I've always loved you, you know, and that's the moment that you can just see coming a mile off. And I'm not saying that you could see them coming a mile off in this film, but there are moments where you could see maybe something similar happening between two characters, of the many characters in the film, you know, which, you know, oh, is this going to be the moment where they say something that, you know, they probably would want to say, but then they don't, and it's just so much more low-key and subtle, I think, and I love that about it. When I say there's many different characters, there are, but really, you know, him and her are kind of character studies of, you know, what the film's alluding to, him and her. And him, James McAvoy, Connor, he's fantastic. I love James McAvoy. Sorry, my nose is getting really itchy, and that's just, I'm really on a roll here. Right, James McAvoy as Connor, he's fantastic. I've been a big fan of him as an actor for over 10 years now. And it's just been great to see him rise and rise and rise, and now he's in a position where he can do films like X-Men Days of Future Past, you know, one of the most successful films of 2014, big blockbuster film that he was great in, but he can also have the time to be in films like Eleanor Rigby and also Filth from 2013. He's doing some of the best work of his career, and it's great to see. And this might be my favourite role of his so far. I thought he was great. He does do an American accent. I thought it was quite convincing, I have to say. But I never really thought about it because I was involved in his performance and how he was portraying the character of Connor in the film, and his kind of, his anguish, his heartache, I guess you could say it, not understanding what was going on with his wife and her disappearance, and him dealing with that and dealing with other things in his life. He has a interesting relationship with his father, played by Kieran Hines, who was great in the film. A really weird kind of performance, but it really works and was kind of affecting without being too full on, if you know what I mean. And their scenes together I really enjoyed. There was a weird kind of dynamic and chemistry there, but it kind of worked. And Bill Hader plays a guy that he works with and a friend of, and Bill Hader is, you know, turned out to be a pretty good actor as well outside of the comedy stuff. There are elements of humour within his performance, but it's, you know, it's still grounded within the drama of the film, I think. And there's a great scene where they're having dinner, and you know, Connor's asking him, you know, just give me, be honest with me, you know, you're walking around on eggshells around me. A really good scene. But really, Eleanor Rigby, in him, you don't see much of her. There are a handful of scenes where Jessica Chastain and James McAvoy share the screen together, probably 4 or 5 scenes, maybe 6. But the rest is solely on McAvoy. You know, he has to carry the film, the emotional weight of the film, and the emotional weight of the situation that has happened that we learn more about as the film progresses. And by the time the film came to its conclusion, I was just like, that was brilliant. I absolutely loved it. And then I knew that there was another film to watch. So, move on to her, and the film opens with a scene that kind of shows you what happened, because there's a little thing that happens in the beginning of him, which is kind of like, oh, what happened there? And they don't explain it, and so you kind of piece together what happened, but in her you see exactly what happened, and it's like, oh god, that's what happened. Ah, you know, and then we see her go off, and we see where she goes to. And we see her family, her father, who isn't even in him, whereas, you know, Connor's father isn't in her. So we have different sets of supporting cast here. We have Viola Davis playing a woman who Eleanor becomes not close with, but friendly with, and was another interesting relationship in the film, where they kind of almost help each other out a bit with, well, I don't think they even do really, but they kind of almost comfort each other. And they've both got, you know, similar kind of life crises going on, but then no point does it descend into, like, you know, oh, this means so much to me. It's just they know what it is, and it's just kind of, they converse. I even loved the bit where her character, Lillian, I think it was, at least played by Viola Davis, where she said this kind of line that was kind of like, you know, a line that you would put in a quote, like a memorable quote in a film. And then she just kind of goes, man, that sounded as lame as I thought it was. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I love that, because that is kind of what would happen in real life. Sometimes you try and say these things, it sounds like it's from a film, and then you think, what am I saying? It just sounds like bullshit. And then she is recognizing and saying, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I love that. And I love that relationship between the two of them. I love the relationship between Eleanor and her parents and her sister, particularly her father, played by William Hurt. There's a very strained relationship going on there, and I thought it was, again, just so subtle. And this is kind of my kind of film, is the subtleties and what goes on behind what's being said, and the body language. That, you know, you get so much from body language if it's done correctly in a film, and I got that so much out of their relationship. And looking at the father of both Eleanor and Connor, you can kind of see how, you know, Eleanor and Connor have maybe difficulties expressing their emotions at times, or trying to convey exactly what they mean by looking at their relationship with their parents. And I thought that was really interesting. But what's great is that you get all this time with Eleanor in her, and Connor's barely there, you know, and it's just, it works great as a film in its own right, looking at a woman struggling through a situation that's happened. And the same thing for him. I think both films work independently of each other, which is quite a feat. And I think watching them as a double bill is even more powerful, because you get to see the other side. And this, for me, is exactly what makes this a very special film experience. I would rate him about 4.5 stars out of 5. A very strong 4.5 stars out of 5. I would rate her as a very strong 4.5 stars out of 5. Viewed together in a double bill, I give it a resounding 5 stars, because it was such an experience. And it shouldn't really work. You watch a whole story for an hour and a half, and then you go back to the beginning again and you watch it all over again. But because they're separated for most of the film, you get this whole other side to it. And this is the real thing that cinched it for me, was the scenes that they share, because they're different in both films. The way that they talk to each other, the way that they perceive each other is different. You know, in him, Connor's very emotionally raw and trying to figure out and understand what's going on. And there's a scene for me which sums up the kind of the greatness of these differences in perception. And you know, I will say there's 2 scenes in the film in particular where there's a big difference in what happens. A scene between Connor and Eleanor in a car, and a vital piece of information comes out, but in both films it comes out in a different way from the other person, and it kind of makes you question the truth. I mean, there's even a scene where James McAvoy's character is wearing a white shirt, but in her, he's wearing a dark shirt. You know, she's perceiving different things about him. You know, he kind of feels like he's this, almost the white knight, that, you know, the innocent of the situation, where she sees him as a more darker person, perhaps. And I love little things like that, where you can look into it and just glean more out of what, you know, a regular film would give you. Because you can't have a scene where you see both perceptions without it being weird and jumbled. Whereas with these 2 separate films that make one whole weird film, it works. And there are lines that are slightly different. There are lines that are exactly the same, but the inflection is different. Connor comes across as a more cold character in her, whereas in him he comes across as very emotional. The same can be said of Eleanor, and we see how basically these 2 people have broken apart and they can't really connect with each other anymore, which is sad to see unfold, but very interesting. But for me, the key scene that sums up for me the genius of the whole concept is a scene where, and I'll show you this on the screen, a scene where Eleanor and Connor are sitting down on the sidewalk, and this is in him. And they're having a conversation, and he's kind of trying to bare his soul, but he can't put the words together to do it. And you know, they're sat quite close to each other. As you can see, it's a close-up shot, and she's looking at him, you know, and almost engaging in what he's saying. And then she decides, you know, she's going to get up and leave. And he's quite affected by this. You know, he's quite emotional. Now we cut to her. They're sitting on the sidewalk, it's the same sidewalk, it's the same scene, but there is a noticeable difference of how far apart they're sitting. And you can see that. If you go back to him, there they are, and then you go to her, and the gap is considerably larger. Not hugely larger, but it is the difference is there, and the wide shot is there. It shows a more vacant feeling from Eleanor, a more distant feeling from her as to how she feels towards her husband at that point in time. And the camera is slowly panning in, and also she's not really looking at him that much. She's not engaging with him as much as she was in him, because he's perceiving that she is engaged in what he's saying, but she, you know, to herself is not. Which sounds complicated when I say it, but it seems so simple in my brain. Well, she's almost leaning away from him at one point as well, which doesn't really happen in him. Although, I mean, let's just take all that off the screen now. I mean, it's not like between both versions, you know, she's like, oh, so into him and engaged like that. And then the other one, she's cold and distant. It's subtle differences, you know. But I love that when the camera zooms in, as soon as it gets just close enough, almost as close as it was in him, that's when she decides to get up and leave, because it becomes too intimate for her at that point. And that, for me, is what makes the films incredible. The performances are fantastic, especially from the two leads, who are just brilliant together, both in their scenes where they're conflicted with their relationship and the scenes where they're celebrating their relationship and having a great time being, you know, young lovers. And I thought it was a brilliant portrait of loss, of heartache, and dealing with emotions. And you know, yeah, very, very. I just love the film. Love the film. And as I said, 5 stars for both of them, viewed as one kind of piece in 2 separate parts. Now we get to the Disappearance of Eleanor Rigby, them, the combined film. This for me is about 3 stars out of 5. It still works as a film. The emotion is still there, the performances are still there, but you know, you only have one choice between the perceptions, and the perceptions are mixed throughout the film. So you get a scene which I preferred more in him, and it's from the her version in them. Didn't like it, and just the little things that are trimmed out. Like there's a scene where Eleanor is speaking to a young nephew, and he says, "Oh, I catch this butterfly," and his mum corrects him, and she goes, "No, caught the butterfly," and then he starts talking about this butterfly that he caught. Whereas in them, he's like, "I catch these butterflies," and then his mother's like, "Come on, let's leave," and then the scene ends, and you just go, oh, they just kind of trimmed that whole chunk of the scene out, you know. And when you watch him and her, and then you watch them, it's almost like watching the editorial stages of a film being put together, and it kind of took me out of it, really. Maybe if you watched him and her, then you watched them in a couple of years, it wouldn't be as, the contrast wouldn't be as stark, but for me, it's not the one to watch, it really isn't. And it's being released as that, really, and him and her are seen a kind of offshoots, but for me, you know, you lose about 75 minutes of great stuff. Most of the best scenes are in them, I have to say. A lot of the great, you know, monologues and stuff are in there, and a lot of the lines I love. There's some great dialogue in this film that feels so natural, and but is still quite profound without being too pretentious. And I think Ned Benson's a great writer, and a great directorial debut, a great, unique, original debut. I've never heard of a film project like this before. Maybe it's been done before, but for me it was quite unique and interesting and new, and I enjoyed it quite a lot. And I have to concede, I am biased towards this film because the incident that kind of colours the way the characters react and split apart in the film is an incident that I have a lot of personal a personal relationship to. You know, I've my life has been affected by a similar tragedy. Definitely not as much as the main characters in the film, but it's been a part of my life, and so it was relatable in that sense. It was heartbreaking in that sense, but it was also interesting in that sense. And if you've seen the film, you can probably understand what I mean by that. And I've got no problem talking about it. I just don't want to spoil what that part of the film is to anyone who hasn't seen it. So there you go. My thoughts on the Disappearance of Eleanor Rigby films. Definitely avoid them. I mean, it's been said that him and her are kind of like the art house version, whereas them is the more commercial, you know, 2 hours standard version. But well, I guess that is the case. I guess that is the case. I guess I'm just an art house kind of guy. I guess an independent film lover of sorts. But that was what it was for me. And whenever I watch it again in the future, it'll be double billing him and her as a 3-hour 10-minute piece. Fantastic film, fantastic concept. Loved it. You probably won't love it as much as me, admittedly. And maybe you want to check out them. And for me, I almost thought like, hey, if I watch them first and enjoyed it, you know, it would be so good to go back to him and her and have all this stuff expanded, you know, like the extended editions of Lord of the Rings or something. But it undercuts the tension and the intrigue as to what the pivotal situation was in the film, because it's not revealed at first. It isn't in them either, but the way it's dropped is a lot less impactful. And you know, in Him and Her, you have the wait. You have the hour-and-a-half wait to see Eleanor's side of things, and I love that wait. But I loved, it wasn't even a wait because I was so involved in both of their stories, both their sides, and so there you go. It's definitely one of my favourite films of 2014. And I hate to be that wanky person who counts it as one film, but I'm going to count Him and Her as one piece, and that would be in my top 5 of 2014. I'm just going to quickly jump in here. I've just been editing the video, and we're right at the end of the video now, but as I was about to go and finish up the editing of this video, I got an email saying that Jessica Chastain had favorited my tweet about the disappearance of Eleanor Rigby, which I think is pretty cool, you know. For me, I think favourites are more personal, because they're not retweeting it to their audience to say, hey look, someone said something great about my film. They're favouriting it to maybe look back on it in the future and say, you know, that was a nice thing someone said about the work I did. And let me just bring it up on my phone. I'll put it on screen as well so you can read it. So there's no point in me actually reading it out, but I will do anyway. I said, the disappearance of Eleanor Rigby, Him and Her are two fantastic films, and when double billed, make for an exceptional experience. And I did tweet that to Jessica Chastain, because I saw she was replying to some fans about the film. And I think it's great because, you know, it's nice to actually get out a little compliment for a film to a performer who was in the film, or a person who directed the film, and so on. And that's a cool thing about Twitter and social media, when most of it is bullshit. So there you go, that's pretty cool to get a little email saying Jessica Chastain has favorited your tweet. Nice little cool nerd moment there. So just had to throw that into this video for posterity, just as I was editing it as well. And also as I was editing the sequence that I was talking about, the two scenes, I also noticed in the editing that the lighting was different as well. So again, brilliant film, and I'll cut back now to the end of my epic review where I wax lyrical about this this film experience. So here we go, the ending. I'll say thanks for watching in the next bit, I guess. I don't know. Over to you, past Luke. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and yeah, see you next time.
Really nice guy, he looks after his friends, he only chucks them about the place a couple of times on the weekend. Yeah, he's alright by me, apart from the fact he throws cans of Carlin into a tree. Yeah, he's really cool.